Surviving Sepsis is a production of the IPRO QIN-QIO.
As a fireman stationed at the Albany, New York airport, Josh Woodward knew how quickly a fire can spread, ravaging everything in its wake. But he didn't know that sepsis could spread just as rapidly and be just as deadly. A fire often starts with a small spark, and that's how Josh's battle with sepsis began. As the infection spread undetected throughout his body, it affected his vital organs and extremities. After 6 weeks in the hospital and months in a rehab center, Josh returned home as a double amputee lucky to be alive. I'm Patrick Archambault with the IPRO QIN-QIO. In this series, Josh and his wife Chelsea share their story in the hope that it will raise awareness about the danger of sepsis, the effect it can have on individuals and families, the unexpected hurdles that patients face, and the importance of resiliency and overcoming these challenges.
Chelsea, you were his source of strength through this whole thing. Can you share your experience as a spouse and a caregiver?
Sure. So the story from my perspective, we didn't think anything major was going on with him. He was a very active guy, still is, just different. And so he went to the gym frequently, and he believed he had pulled a muscle. And as I believe he mentioned, the kids had just gotten sick, and so we thought he has an injury and he has an illness, not putting the two pieces together. And the morning that I took him into the hospital, I was actually annoyed. One more thing we have to do. We had all just gotten better. I didn't want the kids sitting in an emergency room, waiting room, being exposed to more germs. And I really believed I was going to drop him off and they were going to give him some antibiotics and a sling, and they would call me and I would come pick him up and we'd go home and go back to work in a few days. So when the phone rang, and it was his phone, but a doctor on the other line saying, I need you to get to the hospital right now. Your husband is going into septic shock. It's very serious. We need to rush him to emergency surgery, and we need you to come say, and they use the word goodbye. And I remember that basically just in case. So my daughter and I rushed over there. We ran in, and outside of the hospital, they had somebody waiting for me for valet. They had a nurse waiting for me to take me right back. And I mean, everything was starting to come together slowly, just how big this really was. Because I know that's not standard hospital procedure to have a nurse waiting for you to take you back. And when they took me back into the room he was in, even from the time I had dropped him off, which was maybe only an hour prior, he had declined so much. His skin was gray. His lips were gray. You could tell it was hard for him to breathe. He was making little noises like he was in pain. And doctors and nurses were swirling around him. There was tubes everywhere. There was a little bit of blood on the floor. It was all just a big scene to take in while the doctors are saying, make sure you tell him you love him. And they, at that point, had given us a percentage. I think it was 50-50 about survival. I went into the waiting room and I had to start coordinating who's going to get the kids, who's going to do this. I started alerting family members. A staff member at the hospital actually knew his boss and saw his name on the board and came and found me and said, do you need me to alert his firefighter brothers? And I said, yes, please. Before I knew it, they were all there. And his surgery took about 3 hours. So this all happened in those 3 hours. And then his doctor came and pulled me into a private room, which again is never really a great sign. And she sat there and explained to me what had happened, and saying he had necrotizing fasciitis, which is the flesh-eating bacteria, and that as a result of that, his body had gone into septic shock, and his heart was shutting down, his lungs were shutting down, his kidneys were shutting down. They had him on full life support, and at that point she said she thinks he has about a 50% chance of survival. And so I asked her to try and get a real feel for how serious it was. I said, we have no family here. All our family is out of state. Do they need to come in, and when? And she said, yes, and tonight. And that's really when I realized how dire and how close to death he really was. And they took me back into the ICU, and that was such a shocking sight. Just a whole wall of medication pumps, and he was intubated and tubes coming everywhere, and just a lifeless body. And his family all flew in, and it was 10 days of roller coaster up and downs of getting good news and then setback news, and then things that seemed like it was moving in the right direction, and then back again. And then once he woke up, we were there for a few more weeks while he recovered, and a whole set of other surgeries. I feel like rehab was a really hopeful time. And then he came home. And then that was just the beginning of the caretaker journey.
Did you feel heard as a patient on arrival to the emergency department and throughout your hospital stay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right up to when I went to triage and told them what was going on, that really seemed to kind of move things along pretty quickly. And I mean, I'm sure, as she said, you could tell by looking at me, like I was not just faking it or over-exaggerating. I think they could sense something was wrong. So thankfully, they did take my concerns very seriously, and they moved things along pretty quickly. But in other times, to nobody's fault, it was tough to listen to me or for me to listen to anyone else, because I was so affected by the anesthesia and being on all these different things that they were pumping in me. And initially when I woke up out of the coma, I was intubated and I was in a coma for 10 days. So I had lost significant amount of muscle mass, and I was so weak I couldn't hardly even hold up a pen to write anything. I just didn't have the strength. And so that was difficult for me to even give them an opportunity to listen to me. They would even come in with some graphs that had things you could point to based on what you need, but nothing was really what I was trying to communicate. So initially, that was very frustrating, but that's nobody's fault. It kind of just is what it is. But throughout the whole hospital stay, I can say as a whole, every nurse, doctor, specialist, down to the techs, everybody was very accommodating and would listen to all my concerns. So I was really grateful and blessed to have that. And if I did communicate something that I wanted or needed, if it wasn't in my best interest, they would tell me that, and they would do what's right for me. So I was definitely heard, and I'm very fortunate.
So what advice would you give others seeking emergency treatment who don't know what's wrong? They think something's wrong, but they're not quite sure what.
Oh gosh, I mean, better safe than sorry. I mean, this is your one body. This is your life, like take control of it. Don't, if you're worried about something, do whatever you can to give yourself, some ease. One of the things that I'm learning from, I wish I could go back in time, but we can't, is I should have remembered from my limited training on sepsis that when you have a fever and then you have something else going on in your body that's uncommon, more than pain, more than just, the common cold. For me, it was that spot under my arm. I should have put the two and two together, and I just didn't. If I had gotten that checked out initially, days prior, we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation, because I'd probably still be at the firehouse. But things happen. So don't hesitate if you're that worried about something going wrong, even if you feel like maybe you're a hypochondriac, like just get it checked out. It doesn't matter. It's worth it in the end, even if it gives you peace of mind.
And I think a simple phrase that people could remember is, could it be sepsis? Just to walk in and ask, that will get the staff thinking a little differently about how to test you, what to be looking for. So I think what Josh said, a fever is a really good combination to ask yourself, ask the staff, could it be sepsis?
Yeah.
Surviving Sepsis is a production of the IPRO QIN-QIO. Tune in to future episodes to hear more of Josh and Chelsea's story. Special thanks to Josh and Chelsea Woodward. Producer-host Patrick Archambault. Executive producer Teresa Jacobellis. Executive producer Sarah Butterfield. Video recording and editing Louis Cerritos. This material was prepared by the IPRO QIN-QIO, a Quality Innovation Network quality improvement organization, under contract with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, an agency of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. Views expressed in this material do not necessarily reflect the official views or policies of CMS or HHS, and any reference to a specific product or entity herein does not constitute endorsement of that product or entity by CMS or HHS.